The cold was a living thing. It seeped through the threadbare wool of her tunic, a predator searching for the last vestiges of warmth in her bones. Alara's fingers were numb, clumsy claws as she scrubbed the great hall's flagstones. Each push of the stiff, bristled brush sent a jarring ache up her arms, a familiar pain that had become the rhythm of her life. They called her the Omega Ghost, the shadow that flitted through the stone corridors of the Blackwood Pack stronghold. She was less than nothing, a stray taken in out of some twisted sense of charity by her late mother's sister, a charity for which she paid every single day in sweat and silent suffering. Her world was stone and ice, the scent of harsh lye soap and the perpetual gnawing hunger in her belly. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders hunched. To be invisible was to be safe. But today, invisibility was impossible. The great summit was upon them. Alphas from every corner of the frozen north had gathered, their power a thrumming, dangerous energy that filled the very air she breathed. The stronghold bustled with activity, with the stomp of heavy boots and the deep rumble of powerful voices. For Alara, it only meant more floors to scrub, more logs to haul, and more chances to be noticed and punished for the crime of her existence. A bucket of icy water crashed over her, stealing her breath in a gasp that was half shock, half agony. The cold was so intense it felt like fire, burning her skin through the thin fabric of her clothes. "Dreaming again, little mouse?" Lyra's voice was a silken sneer. Her cousin stood over her, flanked by 2 other she-wolves from the pack, their faces masks of cruel amusement. Lyra was everything Alara was not: beautiful, confident, cherished. Her hair was the color of fire, her eyes a sharp, intelligent green. Alara gritted her teeth, the impact of the water making her shiver violently. She did not look up. Looking up was a challenge. A challenge meant a beating. "The Alpha King arrives today," Lyra continued, kicking the now empty bucket so it clattered across the stones. "My father says he is looking for his mate. Imagine, the mate to the supreme alpha of all packs. She would be a queen." Lyra preened, running a hand through her fiery hair. "Perhaps he will choose me. I am the daughter of an alpha, after all, not some worthless, packless scrap." The words were stones, each one finding its mark on Alara's already bruised soul. Worthless, packless, scrap. She had heard them so often they had become her identity. She pushed forward, resuming her scrubbing, the motion mechanical. Her hands were raw, the skin cracked and bleeding in places. The icy water made the small cuts sting with a vicious intensity. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. "Look at it," one of Lyra's friends tittered. "It's like a drowned rat." Lyra laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Leave it. It stinks of desperation. Come, we must prepare for the king's arrival." Their footsteps receded, leaving Alara alone in the vast, cold hall, shivering in a puddle of her own humiliation. The fire in the great hearth seemed to offer no warmth. She was an island of ice in a sea of stone. For a moment, she allowed her head to rest against the handle of her brush. Despair was a familiar blanket, heavy and suffocating. What was the point of this? Of enduring? There was no future for her here, only an endless succession of cold mornings and painful nights. But then, something flickered deep within her, a tiny, stubborn ember that refused to be extinguished. It was not hope, not really. It was simpler than that. It was the sheer, animal refusal to die, the refusal to let them win. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. She would finish this floor. She would haul the wood. She would survive today, just as she had survived every day before it. It was all she knew how to do. The wind outside began to howl, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the emptiness inside her. The sky, visible through the high arched windows, was turning a bruised, ominous gray. A storm was coming, a great one. She finished the floors, her movements stiff and slow as the cold began to set deep into her joints. Her next task was the wood piles. The alphas demanded roaring fires in all the hearths, a display of wealth and comfort. The responsibility for keeping the wood bins full, of course, fell to her. She wrapped her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders and stepped out into the courtyard. The wind sliced like claws, carrying the first stinging flakes of snow. The air smelled of pine and ozone, the scent of an impending blizzard. She trudged to the massive woodpile at the edge of the bailey, her worn boots sinking into the rapidly accumulating snow. Each log was heavy, coated in a slick layer of ice. She loaded her arms with as many as she could carry, the rough bark digging into her skin. The journey back to the keep was a battle. The wind tore at her, trying to rip the wood from her grasp. The snow was thicker now, a blinding white curtain that turned the world into a swirling vortex of gray and white. She lowered her head and pushed forward, one agonizing step at a time. She made 3 trips, then 4. Her body screamed in protest. Her vision began to blur at the edges. She was so cold, so tired. Just one more trip, she told herself. Just one more, and she could steal a moment by the kitchen's hearth. It was on her 5th trip that the world tilted sideways. The roar of the wind became a deafening thunder. She looked up, a primal sense of dread coiling in her gut. It was not the wind. It was a groaning, splintering sound coming from the keep itself. The roof of the old western gallery, heavy with a mountain of snow, was giving way. Panic seized her. She was directly beneath it. She tried to run, but her legs were clumsy, unresponsive things. The logs tumbled from her arms. Time seemed to stretch, to slow down. She saw the great wooden beams splintering, the heavy slate tiles beginning to slide. A cascade of snow, timber, and stone, then darkness, and a crushing weight. Pain was the first thing to register, a sharp, blinding agony in her leg, and a dull, heavy pressure across her chest that made it impossible to breathe. Dust and snow filled her mouth, choking her. It was dark, a suffocating, absolute blackness. Am I dead? The thought was strangely calm. Maybe this was it. Maybe the cold had finally won. But then she felt the slow, sluggish beat of her own heart. She was alive, trapped. She tried to move, but the debris was too heavy. A wave of terror, cold and sharp, washed over her. She was going to die here, alone, buried in the rubble, forgotten. No one would even look for the Omega ghost. Tears she had refused to shed for Lyra now froze on her cheeks. She was so scared. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a choked gasp came out. Dust filled her lungs and she coughed, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through her body. She lay there for what felt like an eternity, the cold seeping into her, the weight pressing the life out of her. The sounds of the storm were muffled, distant. This was her tomb. Then she heard something else. Shouting. The crunch of boots on snow and rubble. They were looking for survivors. A desperate, fragile hope flared in her chest. She tried to call out again, her voice a raw whisper. "Here!" Here! The sounds grew closer. A section of the debris above her shifted. A sliver of gray light cut through the blackness, and with it, a flurry of snow. A massive shape blocked the light. A figure, broad-shouldered and impossibly large, was tearing away the wreckage with his bare hands. He moved with a speed and strength that was not human, tossing aside splintered beams as if they were twigs. More light flooded in. She could see him now. He was colossal, dressed in dark furs and leather. His hair was the color of midnight, long and wild, dusted with snow. He turned, and for a second his gaze swept over her before moving on. He had not seen her. "No," she whimpered, the sound pathetic even to her own ears. "Please." He paused, his head tilted as if listening to a sound only he could hear. He turned back slowly, and this time his eyes found hers. They were the color of molten gold. They were not the eyes of a man. They were the eyes of a predator, ancient and powerful. They glowed with an inner light, a frightening intensity that seemed to pierce right through her, seeing every scar, every fear, every pathetic secret of her soul. This was him, the Alpha King. He moved toward her, his presence so overwhelming it was like a physical force. The air crackled with power. He knelt, his golden eyes never leaving hers. He reached down, his hands large enough to encircle her throat, and easily lifted a heavy beam that was pinning her chest. She could breathe. She dragged in a ragged, dusty breath, coughing. "Are you hurt?" His voice was a deep rumble, like stones grinding together in the heart of a mountain. It vibrated through her, a strange and terrifying comfort. She could only nod, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. She tried to point to her leg, trapped beneath another section of the collapsed roof. He saw it. Without a word, he braced himself and lifted the heavy slab of stone and wood. He did not strain. He simply lifted it. Freedom. The pressure was gone. But when she tried to move her leg, a fresh explosion of agony made her cry out. He moved faster than she could track. In one fluid motion, he was beside her, gathering her into his arms. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but the strength in his hold was absolute. He cradled her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. And then it happened. His hand, large and calloused, brushed against the bare skin of her wrist where her sleeve had torn. The world exploded in fire and light. It was not a physical fire, but something deeper, more elemental. A searing heat shot up her arm straight to her heart, which hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. A blinding white light flared behind her eyes, and for a moment, she saw not the gray, stormy sky, but a field of impossible silver flowers blooming under a golden sun. She cried out, a sound of pure shock and pain. She felt a burning on her wrist, a pain so sharp and precise it was like being branded. The Alpha King froze. His entire body went rigid. The golden glow in his eyes intensified, blazing like twin suns. He looked down at her wrist, his expression one of stunned, absolute disbelief. Alara followed his gaze. There, on her pale, dirt-streaked skin, a mark was forming. It burned itself into her flesh, lines of incandescent silver light weaving into an intricate pattern. A wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl, coiled around a delicate, 5-petaled flower she recognized from her vision. A moonflower. The light from the mark cast an ethereal glow on their faces. The pain began to subside, replaced by a strange, humming energy that coursed through her veins. It felt like coming home to a place she had never been. The king's gaze lifted from the mark to her face. The raw power in his eyes was gone, replaced by an emotion she could not name. It was ancient, vast, and achingly tender. It terrified her more than his power ever could. He lowered his head, his breath warm against her cheek. A single word escaped his lips, a rumbling whisper that was both a question and a statement of fact. You! Her mind reeled. What was happening? What was this mark? This feeling? This impossible connection to the most powerful being she had ever encountered? Her instincts screamed at her, a chaotic chorus of terror and a bizarre, deep-seated recognition. Her body, cradled in his arms, felt safe for the first time in her life. Her mind, however, was screaming at her to run. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw the confusion. His expression softened, though the intensity never left his gaze. Mine, he breathed, the word a possessive, absolute claim. It was not a threat. It was a promise, a declaration to the universe itself. The chaos of the rescue was fading into the background. Other wolves were pulling people from the wreckage, but for Alara, the world had shrunk to the space between her and the Alpha King. His scent filled her senses, pine, winter storm, and something else, something uniquely him, something that felt like strength and safety. She tried to pull away, a feeble, instinctual gesture of self-preservation. She was nothing, a servant, an omega. This was a mistake, a terrible, dangerous mistake. His arms tightened around her, not painfully, but irrevocably. Do not, he commanded, his voice soft but leaving no room for argument. I have you. The commotion around them finally broke the spell. Her uncle, Alpha Borin, rushed over, his face pale with shock. Your Majesty, are you all right? Then his eyes fell on Alara, held in the king's arms. His expression shifted from concern to confusion, and then to pure, undisguised contempt. That? It is just the Omega. Leave her. She is of no importance. The Alpha King, Kale, slowly raised his head. His golden eyes, which had been so tender when looking at her, turned to chips of ice. The temperature around them seemed to drop by 20 degrees. She, Kale said, his voice dangerously quiet, is more important than your entire bloodline, and you will address her as Luna. Borin recoiled as if struck. His eyes widened, darting from the king's face to the faint silver glow still emanating from Alara's wrist. Understanding and a horrified jealousy dawned on his face. It was then that Lyra pushed through the crowd. What is going on? Father? She stopped dead, her gaze locking onto Alara. She saw the king's protective hold. She saw the dawning horror on her father's face. And then she saw the mark. The silver wolf and the moonflower, a brand of fate, a symbol known to all their kind, the claiming mark of a fated mate. Lyra's face, already pale from the cold, turned ashen. Her beautiful features twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her green eyes fixed on Alara with a venom that was almost a physical blow. No, Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with rage. It cannot be. Her? A worthless, filthy nothing. Alara flinched, curling deeper into the king's embrace. The familiar words still had the power to wound her, to remind her of what she was, or what she had been. What was she now? What was happening to me? Before Kale could respond to Lyra's outburst, another figure emerged from the periphery. He was tall and lean, with an aristocratic beauty that was somehow unsettling. His eyes were the color of slate, and a thin, cruel smile played on his lips. Lord Vorlag, an alpha from the Shadowfell territories, a known rival to Kale. Vorlag's gaze swept over the scene with cold calculation. It lingered on Kale's possessive hold on Alara, and then, with a flicker of dark interest, it settled on the glowing mark on her wrist. He saw it. He understood. His cruel smile widened. He had not found a weakness in the Alpha King. He had found a weapon. Kale felt the shift in the air, the predatory focus of his rival. He pulled the furs of his cloak more securely around Alara, shielding her from the prying, hostile eyes. He stood, lifting her effortlessly, her injured leg dangling uselessly. "She needs a healer," he announced, his voice booming over the howl of the wind, a clear challenge to anyone who would dare to question him. He started walking toward the main entrance of the keep, his personal guard falling into formation around him like a wall of solid muscle and steel. Alara buried her face in the fur of his cloak, overwhelmed. The pain in her leg, the burning on her wrist, the whirlwind of emotions, it was too much. The world was a blur of shouting faces, falling snow, and the steady, powerful beat of the king's heart against her ear. She was a ghost. She was worthless. But the most powerful man in the world had just called her his. And in the heart of the storm, surrounded by enemies, she did not know if it was a death sentence or a salvation. Kale carried her through the chaotic halls as if they were empty. Wolves scrambled out of his way, their eyes wide with shock and awe. He ignored them all, his focus solely on the fragile burden in his arms. He took her to his own chambers, a suite of rooms hastily prepared for him, kicking the door open with his boot. He laid her gently on the massive bed, its furs a sea of black and gray. The warmth of the room was a shock after the biting cold outside. A fire roared in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. "The healer will be here soon," he said, his voice softer now. He knelt by the bed, his golden eyes scanning her face, searching for something. Alara could only stare back. Now that they were alone, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. This was the Alpha King, a being of myth and legend, a warrior who had lived for centuries. And he was looking at her with an expression of profound, earth-shattering tenderness. It did not make sense. Her mind, conditioned by years of abuse, could not process it. This had to be a trick, a cruel joke. She instinctively tried to hide her marked wrist, tucking it under her body. The movement sent a jolt of pain through her leg, and she winced. "Do not hide from me," he said, his voice a gentle command. He reached out and carefully took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. He turned her wrist over, his thumb stroking the glowing silver mark. A tremor went through her at his touch. It was not a feeling of fear, but of connection. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in her very soul. "I have waited for you for a very long time," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the mark. "Centuries. Centuries." The word was incomprehensible. Her entire life had been a mere 17 years of misery. What could a being like him possibly want with someone like her? I don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse. I'm no one." "You are my mate," he stated, the words simple and absolute, as if declaring the sun rose in the east. "You are the other half of my soul. There is no one more important in this world." His sincerity was a blow. It was so contrary to everything she had ever been taught that her mind refused to accept it. She started to tremble, a delayed reaction to the cold, the pain, and the overwhelming shock. He saw it and immediately moved to cover her with another layer of thick furs. His movements were efficient and surprisingly gentle. He was a creature of immense power, yet he handled her as if she were made of spun glass. The pack healer, an old, wizened she-wolf, arrived, her eyes wide with curiosity and fear. She scurried in under Kale's intense scrutiny, her hands shaking as she examined Alara's leg. "A clean break," the healer pronounced, her voice trembling. "It will heal, Luna. I will set it." Luna. The title felt alien, a costume she had no right to wear. She looked at Kale, a silent question in her eyes. He simply nodded, his golden gaze a silent promise of protection. The process of setting the bone was excruciating. Alara bit her lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood. Through the haze of pain, she was aware of Kale's constant presence. He never left her side. He held her hand, his strength flowing into her, a steady anchor in a sea of agony. When the healer was done and had bound her leg in a splint, Kale dismissed her with a curt nod. They were alone again. The storm raged outside, a physical manifestation of the turmoil inside her. "Rest," he commanded softly. "You are safe here." Safe. It was a foreign concept. She had never been safe. But as she lay there, watching him stoke the fire, the sheer force of his presence was like a fortress wall around her. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something she had long since abandoned, a desperate, terrifying hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was real. Sleep claimed her, a deep, exhausted slumber born of pain and emotional overload. But her rest was short-lived. A new kind of pain woke her. It was a sharp, pulling sensation in her chest, a hollow ache that spread through her limbs. It felt like a part of her was being ripped away. She sat up with a gasp, her eyes flying open. The room was dark, the fire burned low. Kale was gone. The ache intensified. It was the bond. A frantic, desperate longing for his presence washed over her. It was a physical need, as demanding and undeniable as the need for air. Where was he? Panic began to set in. She tried to stand, forgetting about her leg. She cried out as she put weight on it, collapsing back onto the bed. The door to the chamber burst open. Kale stood there, his chest heaving as if he had run a great distance. His eyes were wild, glowing gold in the dim light. "I felt your pain," he said, his voice rough with urgency. He was at her side in 2 long strides. "I am here." The moment he touched her, the agonizing ache receded, replaced by a wave of warmth and relief so profound it made her dizzy. The bond settled, humming with contentment. "I had to meet with the other alphas," he explained, sitting on the edge of the bed. He never let go of her hand. "To deal with your former alpha." His voice was laced with cold fury when he said the words. "I should not have left you." "It hurt," she whispered, ashamed of her own weakness. "I know," he said, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "It is the bond. It is new. It will not tolerate distance yet. I will not leave you again." He stayed with her for the rest of the night, sitting in a large chair he pulled beside the bed. He watched her as she drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, a silent, powerful guardian. Every time the hollow ache threatened to return, she would open her eyes to find his golden gaze on her, and the pain would recede. But outside those protected walls, jealousy and ambition were festering. Lyra, consumed by a hatred that bordered on madness, sought out the one person she knew shared her desire to see the Alpha King brought low, Lord Vorlag. She found him in the library, staring into the fire, a cruel smile on his face. He looked up as she entered, his slate-gray eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. "The little Omega is the king's mate," Lyra spat, her voice dripping with venom. "It is an abomination. She is nothing." "On the contrary," Vorlag purred, turning from the fire. "She is everything. A keystone. A vulnerability a man like Kale has not had in centuries. He is strong, but a soul bond, that can be broken. And in the breaking, so can the man." Lyra's eyes lit up with malicious understanding. "What do you want?" "I want you to help me get to her," Vorlag said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "The chaos of the storm and the collapsed wing provides the perfect cover. His guard is focused on securing the perimeter. They will not expect an attack from within." "And what do I get?" Lyra demanded. Vorlag's smile was predatory. "When Kale is gone, and I am the new Supreme Alpha, I will need a queen. A true queen, of high birth and ambition. Someone like you." It was a lie, but it was the lie Lyra desperately wanted to hear. Greed and jealousy blinded her to the danger she was courting. She agreed. The abduction was swift and brutal. While Kale was forced into a brief, urgent council with his most trusted warriors in the adjoining room, Lyra slipped into the bedchamber. She used a key her father possessed, her movements silent. Alara was drowsy, drifting on the edge of sleep. She saw Lyra approach, her face a pale mask in the firelight. "Hello, little mouse," Lyra whispered, her voice full of triumphant malice. "Did you really think you could be queen?" Before Alara could scream, a heavy cloth was pressed over her mouth and nose. It smelled sweet, cloying. Her head swam, and the world dissolved into blackness. Two of Vorlag's men, disguised as Blackwood guards, slipped in behind Lyra. They lifted Alara's limp body from the bed. "The iron," Vorlag commanded from the doorway. They clamped heavy, cold iron manacles around her wrists, directly over the soul bond mark. The silver glow of the mark sputtered and died, smothered by the cold metal. In the next room, Kale roared, a sound of pure, soul-shredding agony. He clutched his chest, staggering as if he had been stabbed. The bond had gone silent. The connection to her, which had been a warm, vibrant light inside him, had just been snuffed out. He knew. He burst through the door to find the bed empty, the scent of his rival and the cloying smell of the sleeping draught hanging in the air. A primal rage, the likes of which the world had not seen in centuries, erupted from him. His eyes blazed with the light of a dying star. The entire keep shook with the force of his fury. Alara awoke to pain. A dull, throbbing ache in her head and a deeper, more profound agony that radiated from her wrists. The cold iron cuffs felt like they were leeching the very life from her. The bond was a screaming void, a hollow wound in her soul where Kale's presence used to be. She was in a cave. The air was damp and smelled of wet earth and something else. Something metallic and foul. Blood. Torches cast flickering, monstrous shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Lord Vorlag stood before her, his arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Welcome, little queen," he said, his voice mocking. Or should I say, little key? Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her mind. "Where am I? What do you want?" "You are the guest of the Ember Covenant," he announced grandly. Figures in dark robes emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden by deep hoods. "We believe the old ways are weak, the reliance on the moon goddess, on fated mates. It is a chain that holds our kind back from our true potential." He began to pace in front of her. Kale is the ultimate symbol of that old way. He is powerful, yes, but his power is tied to this sentimentality, this bond. He gestured to her shackled wrists. It is his greatest strength, and therefore his greatest weakness. He leaned in close, his slate-gray eyes boring into hers. We are going to perform a ritual, a severing. We will use you to break the bond. The backlash will cripple him, perhaps even kill him. And with him gone, a new era can begin. An era of power, seized through blood and will. Soul-crushing despair washed over her. He was going to use her to kill Kale. The man who had looked at her with such tenderness, who had called her his. The pain in her soul intensified. It was not just the bond. It was the thought of Kale being hurt because of her. She was a curse. Lyra was right. She was a worthless scrap, and she was going to be the death of the only person who had ever shown her kindness. No, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please don't. Vorlag laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Your pleading is meaningless. You are a tool, nothing more. They dragged her to the center of the cavern, where a crude altar of black stone stood. They forced her onto it, the cold rock seeping through her thin tunic. The robed figures began to chant, their voices a low, guttural drone that made the very air vibrate. The pain of the severed bond was unbearable. It was a physical and spiritual agony, a hollowing out of her being. She felt empty, alone, more alone than she had ever been scrubbing floors in the keep. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the despair. This was her fate, to be a weapon used to destroy the only good thing that had ever happened to her. And then, in the deepest, darkest corner of that despair, she felt it. A flicker. It was faint. A tiny spark in the overwhelming darkness. A pinpoint of warmth in the freezing void of the broken bond. It was him. It was Kale. It was not a voice in her head, not words. It was a feeling. A raw, undiluted surge of pure protective fury. A promise. Hold on. The feeling was a lifeline. She clung to it, fanning that tiny spark with every ounce of her will. He was coming. He was fighting for her. I am coming. She had to hold on. She had to fight. Vorlag stood over her, a ceremonial dagger in his hand. The blade was obsidian, carved with glowing red runes. It is time, he said, his voice ringing with triumph. With your life force, we will poison the bond and strike down the king. He raised the dagger. Alara's eyes snapped open. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by something else. Something new. Rage. A fierce, protective rage on behalf of the man who was fighting his way to her. How dare they? How dare they use her? Use this beautiful, sacred thing between them for their own dark ambitions. No, she said, her voice no longer a whisper but a low growl. Vorlag paused, a flicker of surprise on his face. He laughed. You have no say in this, little mouse. He brought the dagger down. At that exact moment, the far wall of the cavern exploded inward. Rock and earth flew as a massive figure, wreathed in a furious silver aura, smashed through the stone. It was Kale. His eyes were not gold. They were blazing pools of molten silver, filled with a rage that promised annihilation. Behind him, his elite guard poured into the cavern, their own eyes glowing, their fangs bared. The battle began instantly, a whirlwind of claws and snarls, the clang of steel against dark magic. Vorlag, momentarily stunned by the sheer ferocity of the entrance, snarled and turned his attention back to Alara. "No matter! I will kill her now!" He lunged, the obsidian dagger aimed at her heart. Kale saw it. He roared her name, a sound of pure terror and fury, as he fought to get to her through the melee. He was too far. He would not make it in time. He threw himself forward, taking a desperate risk. He left himself open, and one of Vorlag's robed acolytes struck him in the side with a wicked, poisoned blade. Kale cried out, a raw sound of pain, and stumbled to one knee. Seeing him fall, seeing his pain, something inside Alara shattered. The world went white. It was not a thought. It was not a choice. It was an eruption. A power she never knew she possessed, a dormant ocean of energy, burst forth from the core of her being. A wave of pure, incandescent white light exploded from her body. It was not a blinding light, but a cleansing one. It felt like life itself, like the first sunrise after a long winter, like the warmth of a healing touch. The light slammed into the robed figures, not burning them, but dissolving their dark magic, leaving them stunned and disoriented. It vaporized the obsidian dagger in Vorlag's hand into a puff of black smoke. It struck the cold iron manacles on her wrists, and they did not just break, they sublimated into dust. The bond, freed, roared back to life. A torrent of warmth, love, and Kale's fierce pride flooded her senses. Vorlag was thrown back, shielding his eyes, a hiss of pain escaping his lips as the pure light touched him. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What are you?" he shrieked. Alara sat up on the altar. She felt different. The light was still inside her, a warm, humming presence. She was no longer cold, no longer afraid. The self-doubt, the years of being told she was worthless, had been burned away in that single, brilliant flash. She looked past him, her gaze finding Kale. He was clutching his side, but he was staring at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. She stood, her bare feet steady on the cold stone. The light seemed to cling to her, making her simple tunic glow like a gown woven from starlight. Vorlag scrambled to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "You worthless Omega runt. You have nothing." She met his gaze, and for the first time in her life she felt truly powerful. Not the power of an alpha, based on dominance and fear, but a different kind of strength, a power of life, of connection. "I am not worthless," she said, her voice clear and ringing with authority, echoing in the now silent cavern. "I am Alara. I am his mate." She looked at Kale, a fierce, protective love swelling in her heart. "And you will not touch him." She raised her hands. She did not know what she was doing, only that it felt right. The light inside her answered her call. Vines of pure white light erupted from the stone floor of the cave. They were not solid, but woven from the same life energy that filled her. They snaked around Vorlag's arms and legs, ensnaring him. He screamed, not in pain, but in terror, as the light began to drain the dark magic from him. His power, built on blood and shadow, could not coexist with her pure life force. The light consumed his darkness, leaving him withered, his power gone, a mere husk of the ambitious alpha he had been. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious and broken. The light within Alara receded, settling back into a warm glow in her chest. The cavern was silent, save for the ragged breathing of the warriors. Kale's guard had dispatched the remaining members of the Ember Covenant. The adrenaline faded, and the strength left her legs. She swayed, and Kale was there in an instant, his own injury forgotten. He caught her, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the power she had unleashed. "You saved me," he whispered into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. She pulled back, her eyes immediately going to the wound in his side. Dark blood was seeping through his tunic. The poison was already spreading, his skin pale around the injury. Without thinking, she placed her hands over the wound. She closed her eyes and focused on the warmth inside her, urging it to flow from her palms. A soft, gentle white light emanated from her hands, sinking into his body. She felt the poison recede, the darkness dissolving under her touch. The torn flesh began to knit itself back together. Under her hands, the wound closed, leaving behind nothing but smooth, unblemished skin. Kale gasped, a sharp intake of breath. He looked down at his side, then back at her, his golden eyes wide with wonder. "A soul healer," he breathed, the words full of reverence. "A gift from the goddess herself. Lost for 1,000 years." He framed her face with his hands, his gaze full of a love so profound it stole her breath. "My strong, powerful queen." He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reverence, of completion. A sealing of their bond, a promise of a shared future. In that kiss, she felt all his centuries of loneliness and the staggering relief of finally finding his home. He pulled back and took her hand, his eyes on the silver mark that was once again glowing brightly on her wrist. He held it up, and as he watched, a matching mark began to burn itself onto the back of his own hand. A golden sun, its rays reaching out to encircle a roaring wolf. The bond was complete. Not a one-sided claim, but a willing, two-way connection. She could feel him now, not just as a presence, but as a part of her. His strength was hers, his love was hers, just as her light was now his. When the storm finally broke, they returned to the Blackwood stronghold. The news of what had happened in the cave, of Lord Vorlag's treachery and Alara's impossible power, had spread like wildfire. Kale called a grand assembly of all the gathered alphas in the great hall, the same hall Alara had been scrubbing only a day before. He stood on the dais, not in his battle-worn leathers, but in the formal regalia of the Alpha King, and beside him, holding his hand, stood Alara. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue that one of Kale's guard had procured for her hair brushed and falling in soft waves down her back. Her leg was still splinted, but she stood tall, refusing to lean on him. She met the gazes of the hundreds of wolves staring up at her, their expressions a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning respect. "You came to this summit believing I was searching for a mate," Kale's voice boomed, silencing the murmurs. "I was, and I have found her." He raised their joined hands, and the matching marks on their skin flared with a brilliant, undeniable light, silver and gold entwined. "This is Alara," he declared, his voice ringing with pride. "A soul healer of the ancient line, my fated mate, your Luna Queen." A collective gasp went through the hall. Then, Kale's eyes turned to ice. "There is also the matter of treason." Alpha Boren and his family were dragged forward by Kale's guards. Lyra was struggling, her face a mess of tears and snarled fury. Boren was pale, his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a terrified, broken man. "For the abuse and neglect of your sacred charge," Kale said, his voice dangerously low as he looked at Boren, "and for conspiring with the Ember Covenant, His gaze shifted to Lyra. You are stripped of your rank. Your pack is dissolved and will be absorbed by my own. You and your family are exiled. You will wander the frozen wastes, packless and shamed, for the rest of your days. Lyra screamed, a raw, animal sound of denial as she was dragged away. Alara watched her go, and she felt not pity, not hatred, but a quiet sense of justice. Lyra's cruelty had been a cage, and now Alara was free. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the powerful alphas who were now bowing their heads to her in respect. She was not the Omega Ghost. She was not a worthless scrap. She was a queen. She was a healer. She was a mate. She felt Kale's hand squeeze hers, a solid, grounding presence in her new reality. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Welcome home, my love," he whispered. And for the first time in her life, surrounded by strangers in a hall that had only ever brought her pain, she knew with absolute certainty that she was finally home.